Welcome to the Perfect Place to Put a Practice podcast by Scott McDonald and DrDemographics.com, the best source of demographic, psychographic, and marketing information for professionals.
Now, since 1960, I have had the futile assignment to track the U.S. population by race in all parts of the country and to relate it to healthcare outcomes. This is not easy. It's become obvious to all that health was partly related to a person's behavior and sometimes to their demographics, or in other words, their heredity. Doctors have done their best to serve a wide and varied population, but patient behavior is generally discounted. So people want there always to be positive outcomes, and they don't want it to be the patient's fault. It seems that we want to ignore it. We don't want to deny anyone health care regardless of what they do, whether they pay for it or not, or cooperate with a doctor or not, or take proper precautions with their health or not. Doctors cannot promise outcomes regardless of patient habits. But this strikes some people as unfair. They think that no matter what they do, they should get a positive outcome from their health care. Now, demography and genetics are not really fair either, are they? Still, to a degree, they are predictable. We know, generally speaking, that if you have certain genetic conditions and you do certain things, it's going to have a predictable result. In short, behaviors influence health outcomes. In a world where politicians are reluctant even to describe some relatively simple binary functions, such as the definition of how women are different from biological males, age, race, and ethnicity require three, almost dimensional chess or interdimensional chess by comparison. In other words, here is a hint. Among other things, their procreative functions, men and women, are different and always has been. And the results in their procreative functions are sometimes predictable and sometimes not. So when the demographers are asked to define populations by race, ethnicity, identity, or other inherited characteristics, including gender, national origin, and culture, it's quite impossible to make promises to them. That is because the real question is, what do you want an outcome to be? In short, if you want to be your best and your healthiest, diet and exercise are always going to have an impact. Patients are involved in these decisions, not excluded from them. And because of that, outcomes are not necessarily predictable, but influenced by these things. Now, the Academy Awards is being scrutinized so that all races are equally represented among all categories, just in case you don't know. Now, I'm saying all categories and all genetics, all races, ages, are supposed to be included in the material that they're judging a film by. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has announced a new change to the Best Picture Oscar nominee starting next year. People must be represented of all sectors of humanity, but it doesn't prove that they're good actors. So it's possible we may have a healthy bunch of people in a film, but they're lousy performers. The new change will be required in the Best Picture category, beginning with the 96th Academy Awards, set to air in 2024. And this is going to have a huge impact. I believe it's going to be a bit of a disaster. They call it the aperture. The aperture must widen to reflect our diverse global population in both the creation of motion pictures and in the audiences who connect with them. The Academy is committed to playing a vital role in helping make this a reality, said Academy President David Rubin and the Academy CEO Dawn Hudson. The statement added, "We believe these inclusion standards will be the catalyst for a long-lasting, essential change in our industry." But let me pose the problem. Does acting, directing, and writing, as an example, does that talent shine through above everything else? In other words, if you have a well-written piece, having good actors may be nice, but it's not necessary. And if the story isn't good, people are not going to care to see it. What role does sexual orientation play in this mix? Will men and women be judged by the same standards? So that we really don't want to have a male category or a female category. And how about language and culture representation? If, for example, Asians are represented negatively with the Academy, does it take points or votes away from them? It's possible that China, the nation of China, may decide, we don't like this, it's not fair, you've got to change. While the motivations for this change may be to seek fair outcomes, it is possible that this may hurt the industry. Equity is rarely equal. Should tall basketball players, for example, or those who are strong or fast be rewarded just because they are gifted? In athletics, of course, they are. And so, with a million Spanish language people coming to the United States, it's going to be a greater demand in television and in movies to have stories in Spanish. Do they have to be good? I don't know, but they certainly have a lot of potential viewers, and that is not being lost on producers. In one of my son's college classes on sociology and anthropology research, and by the way, my son is and has for some years been one of my assistants, he has been asked to define the word Creole. There are several conflicting definitions of the word. Is it a style of cooking, a dialect, subculture, region of North America, style of music, genealogical population, religion, or something else? Do you remember in the movie by Stephen King, The Green Mile? There is a man played by Derek Jeter who was Creole. It's not a large population, so not a lot of Creole or Cajun people are going to go to the movies to see it. But that's an example of what they mean by an inclusive ethnicity. Multiracial populations, or mixed race people, are those of many races, including Creole. Many terms exist for people of various multiracial backgrounds, including multiracial, biracial, multiethnic, polyethnic, many Creole, and on and on. Some are meant as ethnic slurs, some are merely descriptive. Yet we are insisting that institutions use these categories, these terms, with a thought that they're going to be more accurate than other descriptions and therefore more fair. In reality, they are less descriptive of the population because the population doesn't understand who they are. It may appear that the more descriptive, the better, but that's a standard the Academy is setting out. Now, dividing people has become a cottage industry in America. You remember Senator Elizabeth Warren made some claims that she had a Cherokee ancestor 6 or 10 generations previous. That has been debated by genealogists. A former NAACP president is genetically entirely white. And that was a real problem. It created a lot of heat. The real issue is, why should we care? It may have been a major plot point in a Broadway show of, say, Showboat, but that was 1927. California has made the decision that it wants to pay racial reparations for acts committed 100 years ago. Now, if you are a recent immigrant, you may ask yourself, why should you have to pay? We know that proof of discrimination may be nearly impossible over that period of time for an individual. Now, I have concluded that any race or ethnicity has suffered prejudice. I think the black population can definitely do that. But so can every ethnic minority and race prove that they have been discriminated against in some time. Look, why not let the racial and ethnic references die a natural death, instead of having people try to prove that it existed when it cannot be proven? And I believe this would include Polynesians and Inuits and all kinds of populations. They only cause confusion and resentment if pursued, no matter the benefit. Today on CNN, I saw a congresswoman representing the black population that said we need to have, she said $14 billion to make up the deficit that they have suffered. This would bankrupt the country and is demonstrably unfair. Native American tribes have probably suffered. I would say doubly have suffered. But you see, they're becoming a smaller and smaller population, diminished and diluted. I understand familial pride, but it comes at a high cost to America. Can we really determine if a Navajo or a Blackfoot were hurt more than another tribe at some time and in some region of the country? The problem is, in the end, it doesn't help the people who are supposedly being recipients of huge fortunes that they did not work for, nor that they expected to gain. In short, race and culture, if taken to their extreme, are going to be very negative in their outcomes. Now, historically, a person who has had one drop of blood of another race was considered tainted. Of course, people with mixed race ancestry are extremely common, especially in the United States. Countries like Mexico, it's really the rule. In short, there are a large number of different races that have joined together. The same is true, frankly, all over South and Central America, but it's happened also in Asia as well. Populations naturally mix. But you see, with summoner skin and hair colors, bronzers that are out there, just because a person looks a certain way doesn't mean they're being discriminated against. Culture and cosmetics have dramatically changed the world, at least in appearance. So we have to ask ourselves, does anyone care about race anymore? The question, why so many people care about it? And one has to reach the conclusion, it's to gain an advantage over other races and cultures. And this is not really the American way. In the world, there are some countries that have a large and dominant population, like Japan, in which people tend to be of the same ethnic group. But even in Japan, the population is going down dramatically. Some racial and ethnic groups are defying the odds, that is true. Israel is. Russia, on the other hand, is not. Russian population decline is real and significant. Can we, and really should we, try to put a halt to this decline if it is natural? It's not like people from the government are killing people who are not of a particular ethnic group. Now, one suspects that money, as with the reparations movement, and perceived power may have something to do with it. Certainly there is profit to be made on milking guilt from a majority population. And that is the game that is likely to end sooner or later. In short, people feel victimized when they have to pay reparations for wrongs that are committed not by them, but by other people in their country generations ago. Now, these are injustices, and I'm not saying they're not real. I'm just saying over time we change. Now, you remember President Obama was elected, and a lot of Americans thought to put their faith and trust in him, an African American. Well, that's not really true. He was not an African American, he was an African. And because of his race, some people liked him, just for that. But that can't be done again. It is also true that certain institutions like Planned Parenthood, who favor abortion and favored it for generations, and we know, by the way, Margaret Mead, who was the founder of Planned Parenthood, had a racist agenda in her organization. Quite frankly, it wasn't to preserve the population, it was to eliminate those who were undesirable. And this is against the American desires. It's against our culture as a nation. Should they, at Planned Parenthood, be allowed to continue their plans, given America's racial sensitivity? I'm not here to answer that question. I'll simply say it has to be resolved. Now, perhaps there can be an alternative to race or ethnicity that separates or identifies people more narrowly. Fake but politically correct terms like Latinx and Black Lives Matter make it seem as though there's a population of a certain race or ethnicity that should be preserved. But we can also say the same thing of sexual orientation. It's possible, but I need to think the result of such a movement, if it sets aside sexual orientation as being different from the mainstream, it may have some implications that people don't like. Now, we seem to be in a time in which we're mixing demographics, culture, and politics, and I don't think it's going to have a good result. So you ask yourself, are you a green or a red? Are you a Christian radical or a fundamental Orthodox Jew? What do these terms really mean? It seems like religion, dietary practices, dance styles, and politics are kind of the du jour flavor of the month. And I don't think that's a long-term strategy for the country. It will only create resentment and poverty in some circles. Now, Arnold Mitchell, in his book 9 American Lifestyles, divided America up into basically 65 categories of life, people. Some are ethnic, some are economic, some are educational, but they're a way that has rationally divided America. But he feared that we're getting a little deep to keep definitions of groups viable and descriptive. Every lifestyle exists in a world according to popularity, rather than fact or personal preference. His idea, as well as the modern demographers of our time, believe that we should be allowed to be what we want to be and judged according to how we want to be judged. We should not look to protections from the government always to preserve us. Now I want to talk about immigration for just a moment. It is likely that our nation will see a tidal wave of immigration soon, very soon indeed. Demographers point to several reasons for this increase. Much of that increase is due to the situation back home. They come from dysfunctional narco states with cartels and a military which is willing to rob the citizens of its nation. It's becoming chaotic. Those born in America seem unaware of the dangers that motivate people to move thousands, even millions of people, thousands of miles to the United States and risk everything for a chance of stability alone. Drug cartels and corrupt governments are acting as a detriment to the free movement of people. Still, they represent a situation we cannot fix in the United States for the elected, by the electorate, if they are not up to the challenge and very serious about what must be done. Because you see, other governments that influence our government to move people in is a dangerous precedent for us. Regardless of the cause, this time represents an opportunity, even now, even if it would be residents demanding free services. We can always say that's not a good idea. But still, the movement of people against the law to cross borders is going to hurt America. America is in a crisis that Washington, D.C. keeps ignoring. One political party may make extravagant promises to get votes, but it will not work any better than the Obama phones did. If you remember that from, the last decade. In the end, it will only foment broken promises and resentful electorates. This is a hobble, as I mentioned last week. The hobbles must come off. We are facing a demographic crisis in America, and it's primarily racial. And that is a grounds for a civil war and inhumanity, dealing punishment on other parts of the humanity. And I'm seeing that as very scary. Now I have two reports that may help you. One is the practice viability report. It talks about where people are moving in America, how much money they have, their age, their need for health care. We also have the marketing report, which is a lot more nuanced demographic and psychographic report. If you want to go to drdemographics.com, you can get a sample free. Or call us at 800-849-0499 and give us a call. I'm Scott McDonald. I hope you won't take anything I said as derogatory, but rather what to do about the populations as they vote with their feet and shift locations. And thank you very much for listening.